Fu Nam Hoa regained his composure, looked around in all directions, even scanning the rooftops of the narrow alley, but found nothing unusual. Taking a deep breath, he neither advanced nor retreated. Once again, he instinctively reached for the ancestral jade pendant but failed to grasp it. Quickly, he recited a fragment of an incomplete Taoist incantation. This technique was not a spell or a divine power but merely a method to help him calm his mind and steady his breath. If the heart was like a small boat drifting on a vast lake, then this incantation served as an anchor. He positioned himself against a wall and moved sideways toward the corner where two alleys met. His muscles tensed, forming a defensive stance, and he remained highly vigilant. He fixed his gaze on the alley ahead, where a straw-shod youth stood beside Tai Kim Jan, whose body lay in a pool of blood. The youth's body was slightly bent forward in a delicate attacking posture, mirroring Fu Nam Hoa's intense gaze. One sought answers, the other fought for survival, each with different motives. The youth, who appeared out of nowhere, seemed to have targeted only Tai Kim Jan. As for Fu Nam Hoa's sudden appearance, the alley-bred boy, relying on instinct, adopted a posture that conveyed both warning and detachment. You are not worth my time, and I am not worth yours. Fu Nam Hoa asked an unnecessary question, did you kill her? The youth remained silent, holding the murder weapon, a shard of broken porcelain, slightly smaller than his palm, with a sharp edge protruding from his fist. His hands were drenched in blood, whether from Tai Kim Jan's wounds or from the porcelain cutting into his own palm was unclear. Blood dripped onto the ground. After confirming that there was no one else around, Fu Nam Hoa found the situation absurd yet felt a sense of relief. Finally, he shifted his gaze to Tai Kim Jan's soft body. Despite the wretched setting, her natural beauty remained undiminished, graceful, voluptuous. Her chest heaved slightly, while bright red blood continued to pour from her throat and mouth. Her life force was on the verge of extinction, but her body, tempered by repeated training, prolonged her suffering far beyond that of an ordinary person. A slight smile appeared on Fu Nam Hoa's face, though his demeanor carried a chilling cruelty. He asked, why did you kill her? You and this lady had no personal grudges. Was it simply because she teased you in the alley of Naben? Is that enough reason to kill? Since when has this town become so lawless? Do you not know that killing demands retribution, and debts must be repaid? This is true everywhere. The youth remained mute, gripping the shard tightly. Fu Nam Hoa, unfazed by the boy's silence, began to advance slowly, each step firm and steady. He knew Tai Kim Jan was beyond saving. This was not the celestial cave of Van Ha Mountain, filled with divine energy, but rather a prison of the heavenly Tao, where magical arts were forbidden. Unless a godlike figure descended, willing to sacrifice half their cultivation to suppress her soul and resurrect her, she was doomed. But such fortune was beyond her reach. The sage overseeing this town, impartial and detached, would not intervene. On the path of cultivation, many perished without reason, some while seeking opportunities, others due to mere missteps. Though uncommon, it was not unheard of. If one sought immortality, it was impossible to avoid risks. If immortals could simply enjoy the rewards without facing dangers, then to the common folk, they would be as worthless as the dust of the mortal world. Thus, for his journey to this small town, Fu Nam Hoa had already prepared for a life-and-death struggle. But to witness his temporary ally, who had walked beside him, be slaughtered so swiftly, without magical duels or grand battles, just by an insignificant alley rat. He was shocked beyond belief, struggling to accept this absurd reality. If not for this town, a lowly creature like this straw-shod youth wouldn't even be worthy of glimpsing Tai Kim Jan from afar, let alone killing her. Fu Nam Hoa's expression turned serious. In a deep voice, he said, though I was too late to save Fairy Tai, and I cannot kill you to avenge her, if I simply let this pass, the prestige of Lao Long City will be tarnished. So, whether by reason or duty, I must teach you a lesson. As for what happens afterward, how Van Ha Mountain handles you, and how they avenge her, that is your concern." These words were spoken not just to the youth but also for the sage who watched over this town. They were meant as a formality, ensuring that later scrutiny would not bring him trouble. Another possibility was that he was speaking for the Grand Elder of Van Ha Mountain, seeking to demonstrate his righteousness. Otherwise, Fu Nam Hoa, who had long harbored the intent to kill Tai Kim Jan, would have been grateful to this youth for acting recklessly. The boy's impulsive actions had granted him an unexpected advantage. As he advanced, Fu Nam Hoa continued speaking, "Judging by the way you killed her, your physical explosiveness far exceeds that of an average adult man. That is quite rare. If not for this incident, with such boldness and skill, you could have joined the military, proving yourself on the battlefield. If you had the right opportunity and caught the attention of a great general, they might have given you a martial cultivation technique, allowing you to refine your body. In 20 or 30 years, you might have carved out a place for yourself in the world." As Fu Nam Hoa moved forward, the youth slowly retreated, his face directed at the noble-robed heir of Lao Long City. Fu Nam Hoa, tall and elegant, strode through the alley like a jade tree in the wind, exuding an aura of natural nobility and composure. He extended a hand downward, resting it casually on his hip, and smiled, "Such a pity. If you had better fortune, you might have reached such heights. But that's impossible." Amused by his own mockery, his smile deepened. As he stepped forward, his foot suddenly halted mid-air, hovering half a foot above the ground. "Ah, my apologies, it seems I've underestimated you." Fu Nam Hoa found himself rather entertained. His trip to this small town had already been rewarding. First, a lucrative deal with Tong Tap Tan in the Ben Alley, far exceeding his expectations. Then, Tai Kim Jan, a potential obstacle to his grand ambitions, had been killed before his eyes. Not only did he remain untainted by her blood, but he also had the opportunity to claim the 2 bags of gold coins on her person. Who knew? There might even be a secret artifact from Van Ha Mountain among her possessions. Thus, a saying circulated among rogue cultivators, "Bury the dead, and fortune will follow." As Fu Nam Hoa passed Tai Kim Jan's corpse, he didn't spare her a single glance. Instead, the faint scent of blood exhilarated him. One step forward, one step back, the gap between them remained 10 paces. As long as the youth remained trapped in the alley, capturing him later would be as easy as finding a needle in a shallow pond. And with the worn corpse of a beauty behind him, he had ample leverage. Fu Nam Hoa appeared to be toying with a mouse, but in reality, he was carefully adjusting his rhythm. Since stepping onto the path of cultivation at the age of 9, he had never relied purely on close combat to determine victory. There was no need for a life-or-death struggle, such recklessness would cost him more than he gained. This was a golden opportunity, yet it required careful control. He needed to ensure that this unexpected boy lay unconscious before him, incapable of stirring any further trouble. Fu Nam Hoa suddenly asked, "By the way, what is your name?" The blood-drenched youth, expression unchanged, finally spoke in a cryptic manner, "Perhaps neither of you noticed, but I have sharp eyes." In the Ben Alley, when she spoke to me, her gaze toward me was the same as the one she cast upon you. Fu Nam Hoa paused, then laughed, "Interesting. Very interesting." But even as he spoke, his mind was locked onto the boy's left hand, still clenched, still bleeding. That meant he had never loosened his grip. Any ordinary person would have succumbed to the pain long ago. Suddenly, the youth's expression changed, his face filled with shock and terror, eyes wide, staring past Fu Nam Hoa as if the dead woman had risen. Instinctively, Fu Nam Hoa turned his head. In that instant, the youth exploded into action. Like a striking hawk, he leaped. Inside a modest schoolroom without a signboard, the middle-aged scholar Tai Tin Xuan sat alone, playing a game of Go. It was not a famous historical match nor a reenactment of a grand duel between master players. As he was about to place a white stone on the board, he let out a sigh. The move had already been determined, yet he suddenly hesitated. Retracting his hand, he held the stone mid-air, still inches above the board. Despite his humble setting, Tai Tin Xuan remained dignified. As the current overseer of this town, a contemporary sage of the Confucian school, and the former head of Sun Nai Academy, he was a pure scholar in every sense of the word. Even though he had been exiled here to atone for past transgressions, his status remained unmatched. To the common folk of this small town, the passing of the seasons felt like mere blinks of an eye. Teachers at the village school changed frequently, some old, some young, but the air of bookish discipline they carried remained the same, rigid, strict, and uninteresting. None of the villagers ever suspected that the rotating instructors were actually the same man, or that Tai Tien Sin, who rarely left his home, had once held an exalted position, wielding boundless righteous energy in divine authority. At that moment, Tai Tin Xuan's spirit detached from his physical form. Like a celestial being clad in flowing white robes, he effortlessly escaped the confines of his mortal body and drifted toward an alley in the town. In an instant, Tai Tin Xuan arrived at the scene. His gaze first fell upon Tai Kim Jan, the woman lying in a pool of blood. Her soul flickered weakly, on the verge of total dissipation, like a dying ember in the wind. He paused for a moment before stepping forward. The scene before him was a tense standoff. Fu Nam Hoa, the noble heir of Lao Long Tan, was staggering backward, his face a mixture of shock, confusion, and despair. The young boy in straw shoes was frozen in midair, having leaped forward to strike. His left hand clutched a shard of broken porcelain, its razor-sharp edge gleaming. Despite the life-or-death moment, his eyes remained unwavering, and his expression was eerily calm, not at all like a street rat raised in obscurity. The only trace of his origins lay in the hint of resignation buried deep in his gaze. It was a look Tai Tin Xuan knew well. It was the same expression a destitute farmer bore when, after toiling under the scorching sun, he saw nothing but cracked, barren earth. Not agony, not rage, just a deep, helpless acceptance of fate. As the temporary master of this realm, Tai Tin Xuan was well aware of Tran Ben En's lineage. He could trace it back not just 1 or 2 generations but hundreds, even thousands of years. Though he had never met the boy's ancestors, he could reconstruct their history as easily as a magistrate inspecting household records. This town, after more than 3,000 years of growth, had sent its branches far beyond its borders. Some families had produced outstanding individuals, brilliant talents who, though unable to return home in glory, had still managed to secretly support their clans from afar. Over time, 4 major families and 10 powerful lineages rose to prominence. The Tran family was once among them. Their ancestors had once ascended swiftly, wielding influence far and wide. But after enduring 2 devastating declines, they had faded into obscurity. In the vast eastern Bao Ben continent, where countless feudal states and dynasties vied for power, the Tran clan had dwindled into insignificance. By the time of Tran Ben En's father, their lineage was all but extinct. To make matters worse, within the borders of the Great Li dynasty, an imperial decree ensured that the Tran family could never again rise to power. Since taking charge of the great formation that governed this town, Tai Tin Xuan had abided by one principle for over 60 years, balance and order. He had never interfered with the destinies of the townsfolk, no matter how much filth and corruption he witnessed among the aristocrats or how much suffering the commoners endured. Over time, he had grown detached, neither accepting tributes nor bestowing favors, existing merely as a silent overseer. Yet now, something had changed. Stepping forward, Tai Tin Xuan observed the confrontation with interest. Despite his initial fierce killing intent, Tran Ben did not strike a fatal blow. Instead, he delivered a devastating strike to Fu Nam Hoa's neck, sending him crashing into the alley wall. Before the noble heir could recover, the boy closed the distance, elbowed him in the stomach, and pinned him down. One hand gripped Fu Nam Hoa's throat. The other held the porcelain shard to his abdomen. Though Fu Nam Hoa was taller and stronger, he found himself completely overpowered. The strength in the boy's fingers was terrifying, his grip ironclad, the cold edge of the porcelain pressing against his flesh. For the first time, Fu Nam Hoa felt the true weight of death. A single movement, and he would be severed from life. What he failed to understand was that Tran Ben had spent his entire childhood struggling to survive. From a young age, he had wandered the mountains, gathering medicinal herbs, not for his own benefit, but for a conviction greater than survival itself. That relentless determination had allowed him to withstand unimaginable hardships. Even when he accidentally consumed poisonous herbs and writhed in agony in an alley, he crawled home just to deliver a basket of life-saving medicine. He had chopped wood, burned charcoal, fired pottery, and dug through mud, all tasks that forged his endurance. If they had fought outside the town, Fu Nam Hoa's magical arts would have crushed 100, 1,000 of such boys with ease. But within these walls, where the laws of the Tao were suppressed, he had kicked a steel plate. Fu Nam Hoa, humiliated and enraged, snarled. "Kill me, and you'll die with me. If you let me live, you'll still die. You little bastard, no matter what, you're already dead." Tran Ben tilted his head, his calm gaze piercing through the noble's fury. "I never wanted to kill you. We have no grudge. But since you wanted to harm me, I had to fight back." Fu Nam Hoa sneered, "A wretch like you dares talk about reason with me? You? Do you think you're worthy?" Tran Ben remained silent for a moment before asking, "Are you truly determined to kill me?" Something in Fu Nam Hoa's expression shifted. For the first time, he felt a cold, calculated calmness from the boy, one that sent a shiver down his spine. As his face turned red from lack of air, he choked out. "If I swear an oath, will you believe me?" He was playing a trick. Cultivator oaths, when properly made, were binding, but there were loopholes. He could make a superficial vow without truly committing. But the straw-shod boy simply shook his head. At that moment, a gentle voice echoed between them. "Enough." To Fu Nam Hoa, it sounded like the voice of heaven itself, but he had already lost consciousness. Tran Ben turned in surprise. Standing before him, bathed in a soft, ethereal glow, was Tai Tien Sin. The scholar smiled but said nothing. The boy's grip did not loosen. With a casual flick of his sleeve, Tai Tin Swan made a motion as if plucking something from the air. Opening his palm, he saw a small, murky black stain, a lingering, fading remnant of a planted curse. Glancing back at Tran Ben, the scholar sighed in admiration. "No wonder my teacher once said, true talent is second to perseverance. You, Tran Ben, have taught me a lesson today. It is only a shame that I no longer have the right to take on disciples." After saying those words, the scholar chuckled at himself. What value did a disciple of Tai Tin Swan hold these days? His students were merely a classroom full of children learning their first words, each paying an annual tuition of just 300 copper coins. Some from impoverished families could only afford to offer 3 strips of dried meat as payment. He turned his gaze to the young man who was still reluctant to let go. Deep down, Tai Tin Swan asked, "You don't truly wish to kill him, do you? But the problem is, this man will stop at nothing to kill you. So, should you finish him off completely to ensure your own survival and leave tomorrow's troubles for tomorrow? Or do you hope that by swallowing your anger, the storm will pass, and everything will return to normal? Is that what you're thinking?" The boy, who had often overheard scholars next door reciting poetry, blurted out, "What lesson does the teacher use to teach me this?" Tai Tin Swan smiled. "Tran Ben, why don't you try letting go first? Then, you can decide whether to follow me for a walk. There are some things I cannot ignore, I owe you an explanation." Tran Ben hesitated for a moment before loosening his grip. To his surprise, Fu Nam Hoa did not move at all. His eyes, his hair, his breathing, everything was eerily still. With Tai Tin Swan's activation of the Great Formation, the town's reality resumed. The scholar spoke softly, "Follow my steps closely. Try not to stray more than 10 paces away. His robe fluttering, the mysterious and elegant scholar led the way towards the end of the alley. Tran Benin followed behind. As he glanced down at his left palm, he saw raw flesh, exposed bone, but oddly, the wound no longer bled. Walking ahead, Tai Tin Xuan asked with a smile, Tran Benin, do you believe in gods, spirits, demons, and monsters? The boy nodded. I do. When I was little, my mother often told me old tales. She wanted me to believe that good people are rewarded, and bad people are punished. She said that more than anything else, so I remember it best. She also told me that there are water ghosts in the streams who grab children, that a spectral magistrate in the ruined ancestral hall in the north passes judgment at night, and that our door gods come to life at night to protect our homes. I didn't believe much of it before, but, now, I think most of it must be true. Tai Tin Xuan spoke gently, some of what she said is true, and some is false. As for, good people prosper and bad people suffer, that is difficult to say, because the definition of good and evil differs between common folk, emperors and ministers, and those who pursue immortality. Each group reaches vastly different conclusions. Tran Benin tucked away the porcelain shard and quickened his pace, walking side by side with the scholar. Looking up, he asked, Tai Tien Sin, may I ask you a question? Tai Tin Xuan, as if seeing through the boy's thoughts, answered before he could even ask. This small town is the final resting place of a true dragon. It is a burial ground. Countless lesser dragons believe this place holds the strongest destiny and that one day, a dragon will rise from here. Yet, for over 3,000 years, it has never happened. However, the children born in this town have naturally superior bones, temperament, and opportunities, compared to their peers outside. Many of the most famous immortal couples of eastern Bao Ben continent bear children no different from the ones here. Of course, not every child in this town is born with exceptional talent. He smiled but did not elaborate further, perhaps not wanting to hurt the boy's feelings. Instead, he changed the subject. The cultivators who participated in the great dragon-slaying calamity long ago were all severely wounded. Many chose to settle here, building cottages to cultivate in seclusion, awaiting their inevitable deaths. Some, having fought side by side, became fated partners. Over 3,000 years, this town has grown into what it is today. On the map of the Great Li dynasty, it was first recorded as Dai Tre Kong, then renamed Long Yuan by a sage. Later, fearing that the emperor of Great Li might take offense at the name Yuan, it was changed once more. For a long time, Tran Benin had held back his words. Finally, he could no longer contain them. Clenching his fists with a mix of longing and anticipation, he asked, Teacher, what kind of people were my parents? Tai Tin Xuan fell into deep thought. Since that wandering Taoist already revealed some of your fate, I, too, can break the silence and tell you a few things. In my memory, your father was an honest and kind man, of ordinary talent, nothing remarkable. He should never have been taken away from this town, yet he became a mere pawn in someone else's eyes, a meaningless trade, a losing deal. Perhaps out of anger, or sheer desperation, the outsiders who sought his porcelain made a move on his life-bound porcelain. From that moment on, his fate turned treacherous, and you and your mother suffered alongside him. Later, for some reason, he discovered the secret of this life-bound porcelain. He realized that once removed from the town and refined in a kiln, he would become a puppet under another's control for life. So, he secretly shattered the piece that belonged to you, a small porcelain paperweight. If I recall correctly, it was in the shape of a lion. Tai Tin Xuan spoke in a heavy tone. Every child born in this town has their name recorded in a secret registry. A specialized craftsman extracts a drop of their heart's blood and infuses it into a porcelain piece, which is then fired in a kiln. For girls, the process takes 6 years, for boys, 9. The kiln fire must never go out for a single day. Just like normal porcelain, their talents and potential are left to fate, but the bidding for these life-bound porcelain pieces is intense. Even though your natural aptitude is ordinary, when your father decisively shattered your porcelain, those outside the town who had invested in it must have been furious. As for your mother, she was a gentle and quiet woman. He suddenly chuckled. Back then, when she married your father, many of her peers in town were baffled. But to be honest, if you ask me for details about their lives, that is difficult. Ever since I arrived in this town, apart from teaching, I had many other duties to fulfill. Tran Benin murmured, I see. He turned his head away and rubbed his face with his injured left hand, smearing blood across his cheeks, but he was reluctant to use his sleeve to wipe it off. The two passed by 12 ancestral shrines. Tai Tin Xuan did not look at him but spoke plainly. Years ago, when the true dragon fell here, four sages personally sealed an agreement. Every 60 years, a new overseer would be assigned to guard the remnants of its fate. At the time, there was a great debate about whether to completely eradicate its remains. But telling you too much of this is dangerous for you. He sighed. As a rule, scholars like me often say that within the three teachings, Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, one additional power, military strategy, holds sway. Beyond that, the 100 schools of thought, hidden paradises, immortal sects, and noble families all have their own stakes in this town. Amusingly, within the past century, possessing even a single, porcelain bidding, quota has become the unspoken measure of whether a sect or noble house is truly first-rate. Tran Benin smiled. I don't understand everything you're saying, teacher, but I'll remember it all. But today, knowing my parents were good people is enough for me. Tai Tin Xuan laughed. Good. That's enough for now. Let's go, I have something to show you. The boy, wide-eyed with curiosity, followed the sage toward an ancient locust tree. Alley of Dao Deep. In the house, an elderly man with a kind face sat on a rattan chair in the hallway. Beside him sat a lively and adorable young maid, dressed in light yellow patterned trousers with a thin blue-green silk dress draped over her. She was gently fanning herself while listening to the old man's stories. Suddenly, the old man asked, Dao man, where's the wind? Are you dozing off again? I'm not trying to scare you, but if you were in a big household in a town outside, being this lazy would definitely get you punished. There was no response. The old man, who had always been generous and easygoing with his servants, was about to tease her again when his face suddenly changed. He lifted his head, looking into the distance with a grave expression. Within the courtyard, it wasn't just the young maid's fan that had fallen silent, there was not the slightest movement of the invisible wind. The old man quickly held his breath, focused his mind, and silently recited an incantation, entering a meditative state to prevent losing years of cultivation and spiritual energy in this brief disruption of time's flow. He sighed softly. Even someone as disciplined and respectful of tradition as Qi Jingchun had to break his rules this time. Indeed, the storm was about to come. The well of iron chains. Not far away, a burly young man squatted by an iron-chained well, staring intently at the wheel of a cart. However, out of the corner of his eye, he secretly glanced at a plump village woman. She was bending over, lifting a bucket of water from the well, her curves exaggerated, her ample hips arched high, her full chest heavy, her figure exuding a primal and untamed allure. She was just an ordinary woman, yet she carried an inexplicable charm. The young man, still unaware of the eerie silence around him, swallowed nervously, quickly shifting his position as if adjusting his squat. He recalled what his master once told him, women from the foothills are like tigers in the forest, formidable but manageable. However, once they climb the mountain, they become kings of their domain, the true predators. Every hero in history has met his downfall at the hands of his own mountain tiger, without exception. But right now, the young man felt that even the forest tiger before him was already fearsome enough. She wasn't even conventionally beautiful, yet she made his heart itch. If she were to slap him without reason, he probably wouldn't dare retaliate. In fact, if she laughed, he might even laugh along with her. This thought left him a little frustrated and disappointed. He glanced down at his crotch and muttered to himself, spineless. No wonder I have no backbone. The Muddy Alley's ancient records. In the muddy alley, Song Juten was flipping through an ancient and heavy local chronicle. Over time, he had discovered a pattern: every 60 years, there was an increase in recorded events. He privately named the book Jia Chronicles. He also noticed another strange trend: people who left this town with distant relatives in their youth almost never returned. It was as if they had no attachment to their homeland, choosing instead to establish roots elsewhere. Many family lineages flourished outside, growing into towering trees far from their original soil. Because of this, Song Juten gave the book another nickname: the Book Beyond the Wall. At this moment, he was reading a biography of a man named Xiao Shi. The records were sparse, which was typical for this chronicle. Song Juten had already memorized the entire book, so when rereading, he only picked the strangest entries, treating them like a storyteller recounting legends. Whether these stories were true or not, he didn't really care. What he did remember was a certain official in court robes, who, before leaving town for the capital, came here alone at midnight. With an extremely solemn expression, the man told Song Juten one thing: remember every name in this book, every family and their origins in this town, especially their connections with the 4 great surnames and 10 clans. At that moment, Song Juten sat there completely motionless, like the dilapidated and weather-worn stone deity statues scattered throughout the southeastern part of town, toppled over into the grass, covered in dirt, unmoving no matter how harsh the wind and rain. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting an unusually eerie stillness over the study. The only living things stirring in the house were the maidservant Ji Kue and a lizard that had not blinked once. She had long sensed something unusual. The first thought that popped into her head was to rush next door and scold a certain black-faced girl, but upon realizing the existence of a particular sword, she dismissed the idea. Instead, she walked into her young master's study, glanced at the book he was reading, saw the name Xiao Shi, and found it too tedious. She flipped a few pages forward until she saw an entry about Ta, which made her smile. However, soon she frowned again and turned the pages back to where they were, to avoid revealing any secrets. Over the years, her young master's intelligence had made him suspicious about her true identity, but he had never found solid proof. She didn't want to fail at the last moment. She had followed him to the village school often, hearing scholars say all sorts of nonsense. Some of their words were utterly ridiculous, like, to sacrifice one's life for righteousness is honorable. But others weren't too bad, like, those who walk 100 miles are only halfway there at 90. That one made a lot of sense. Meanwhile, the yellowish lizard on the door frame basked in the sunlight, completely still. In this absolute silence, it returned to its true form, its body glistening like a flawless piece of jade, translucent and shimmery. The black-clad girl's sword dance. In the courtyard next door, Ning Yao, dressed in black, had entered a profound and mysterious meditative state. She no longer breathed through her mouth or nose, resembling an unborn child in the womb, with her spirit withdrawn and thoughts sealed. Within the snowy white scabbard, her sword, finally freed, slowly emerged. It hovered around its master affectionately, like a bird nestling against its owner, yet its movements were deliberate. It wasn't flying randomly but instead tracing runes in the air, forming a feng shui barrier to aid in her healing. Despite showing no visible signs of breathing, the girl's body hungrily absorbed the surrounding energy, devouring the essence of the world itself. Because of this, at this very moment, the quiet and weighty stillness of the town clashed with the storm brewing within this courtyard. In the alley of Neben, outside a cluster of buildings, a rascal of a child was furiously kicking at a door, his saliva flying as he shouted, "Tran Benin. If you don't come out, I'll find someone to kill you and smash your entire rundown house. I know you're in there. What's the rush? Or are you with Tong Tap Tan's little wife and Tri Q, doing that thing? Broad daylight, and you don't even consider Tong Tap Tan's feelings. Fine, fine, You won't come out, huh? I'm leaving then. I'm really leaving. If I leave now, you'll never see me again in this lifetime. All those treasures I had. I was going to leave them for you. Tran Benin. Come out now. For some reason, by the end of his rant, the child's voice carried a hint of sobbing. He fiercely pulled back the 2 slugs he had stuck on the door and turned away. Ko-san suddenly felt a throbbing pain in his skull. He quickly turned around, and upon seeing a familiar face, he cursed, Tran Benin. You damn. The straw shoe-wearing boy's face was not looking too good. Sensing this, Ko-san immediately switched his tone. Are you feeling better? His manner changed as naturally as flowing water, without the slightest awkwardness. Knowing this brat's heartless nature, Tran Benin, still holding a newly fired ceramic bottle, said irritably, you should know the answer to that yourself. Realizing he had more important matters at hand, Ko-san quickly dragged Tran Benin to the front of the courtyard and shoved 2 intricately embroidered pouches into his hands. Lowering his voice, he asked, do you remember that little loach I asked you for last year? Tran Benin, confused, took the heavy pouches. The contents were not unfamiliar. Back when a young noble in splendid attire had forcefully bought that golden carp, he had later gifted Tran Benin a bag of coins. Glancing around to make sure no one was nearby, Tran Benin hurriedly opened the door, pulled Ko-san inside, placed the ceramic bottle aside, and sternly asked, did some outsider offer to buy that loach from you? Ko-san, I'm warning you, do not sell it. No matter what, don't sell it. Didn't you want to give your mother a good life in the future? You must keep that loach. Do you understand? Ko-san suddenly burst into tears, grabbing onto Tran Benin's sleeve and sobbing, I wanted to return the loach to you, but my mother wouldn't let me. She even slapped me. She's never hit me before. And that storyteller, who knows if he's a god or a demon, he's terrifying. First, he placed me inside a white bowl, then the loach suddenly grew huge. It became bigger than our water jar at home. Tran Benin clamped a hand over the child's mouth, his expression serious. The loach is yours now, it belongs to you. Ko-san, do you still want your mother to have a good life? To eat meat every day? To buy fine silk for herself? Ko-san sniffled and nodded firmly. Tran Benin let go and squatted down. What about these 2 pouches of money? Did you steal them? Ko-san's eyes darted around. He was about to lie when Tran Benin, who knew him all too well, flicked him on the forehead and said sternly, take them back. Ko-san stubbornly refused, I won't. Tran Benin, furious, raised his hand for another flick, but upon seeing the child's determined expression, he hesitated. He softened his tone and asked, tell me everything. What exactly happened? Ko-san narrated the entire incident, from the old locust tree to the iron lock well, then back to the courtyard in the Ben alley. He explained how the storyteller wanted to take him as a disciple. Despite being a mischievous troublemaker, the child was indeed sharp and observant. Hearing this, Tran Benin started piecing things together. It was likely that Ko-san had stumbled into a rare fate in this small town, an opportunity akin to those of the renowned figures in history. However, remembering the despicable nature of Jiang Chan Quan Lu Chi Mao, Tran Benin grew anxious. Could Ko-san really trust this storyteller? While Tran Benin was deep in thought, Ko-san suddenly grabbed the pouches from his hand and threw them into the room before dashing away. But before he could escape, Tran Benin caught him by the collar and dragged him back. Ko-san clutched his head in surrender, looking pitiful. Though Tran Benin had managed to stop him, he was unsure how to proceed. This matter was too serious. One wrong choice could put both Ko-san and his mother in danger. Just then, a black-clad young girl appeared at the doorway. My mother used to say, everyone has their own fate. This brat. He's got a destiny tougher than steel. Ko-san's eyes lit up. He wiped his nose, grinned, and said, Sister, you're really pretty. You look just like my second sister. Wanna come over to my place? Tran Benon sighed, since when did your mother remarry your father? Exposed, Ko-san rolled his eyes and quickly changed his tone. Tran Benon, you really got some nerve. When are you bringing a wife home? Gonna have a wedding night? What a pity I won't be here to hear the action. Tran Benon smacked his head and turned to the black-clad girl apologetically. He's always like this. Don't mind him. The girl sneered, pathetic. From afar, a voice bellowed, Ko-san. The child paled. I gotta go, Tran Benon. I'm really leaving. Despite saying he would leave, his grip on Tran Benon's hand tightened. Deep down, Ko-san had long regarded Tran Benon as family. Tran Benon crouched down and whispered, be careful of your master. And take care of your mother, she only has you now. Ko-san nodded. When you get out there, speak less and work more. If you have to suffer, suffer quietly. Don't always try to win arguments, people out there hold grudges. Ko-san's eyes turned red, and he muttered, people here hold grudges too, except you. Tran Benon laughed but said nothing. As he watched Ko-san leave, a strange sadness settled in his heart. To him, Ko-san had always felt like a younger brother. Standing in the alley, Tran Benon smiled bitterly. The heavens were truly stingy. Not long after, the black-clad girl sat at the table, idly fiddling with 3 ancient coins. She picked up a jade hairpin and noticed the inscription. A gentleman's words, warm as jade. Brewing medicine and the black-clad girl. Brewing medicine was a delicate task, much like threading a needle. Chen Pingyan performed it with meticulous care, fully absorbed in the process. There was an inexplicable sense of joy radiating from him. However, the black-clad girl was not known for her patience. In fact, aside from practicing with her sword and saber, she had little interest in most things. Having left her home at a young age to wander the world alone, she had learned to live roughly. Because of this, she didn't find Chen Pingyan's modest four-walled home uncomfortable in the slightest. She had spent too many days under open skies, braving the elements, so even someone originally particular about living conditions would eventually cease to care. The girl asked, is your left hand okay? Chen Pingyan, whose left hand was wrapped in cloth bandages, handed her a bowl of medicine with both hands. As she took it, he smiled and said, it's fine. Before I got back to the alley, I found some herbs and made a paste for the wound. Back when I worked as a kiln laborer, I used this remedy whenever I got cut or burned. It's an old secret formula that an elder from the Yang family pharmacy passed down to me long ago. I once promised him not to share it, but since you travel far and wide, who knows, you might find it useful someday. If you want, I can try to find that old man and ask him for permission to tell you. But I had to buy medicine from the pharmacy today, and I didn't see him. Hopefully, he just stepped out temporarily. As the girl drank the medicine, her long, sword-like brows furrowed slightly. But she still finished it in one go without changing her expression. She handed the empty porcelain bowl back to the straw sandal-wearing boy and muttered, soft-hearted fool. No wonder you're so poor that you rattle like an empty can. You deserve to be bullied. Before he could react, she added, don't take it personally. I just speak bluntly. Ironically, these words hurt more than the previous ones. Chen Pingyan hesitated for a moment but didn't say anything. The black-clad girl wiped the corner of her mouth with her thumb, then sat upright and said seriously, right now, the one overseeing this land is a sage, the same private school teacher you mentioned before. Though he has the intention of helping you, ensuring you no longer have to fear for your life, you need to understand something. Even the strongest individuals have limits. Even sages are no exception. Besides, this Qi Jingchun fellow isn't in a good position himself, it's like a clay Buddha trying to cross a river, he can barely save himself. The real danger is what happens when he can no longer protect you. She continued, her voice filled with pride, I, Ning Yao, never forget a favor. If someone as much as glares at me, I make sure to get even. Even the strongest have limits. Never forget a favor. Always take revenge. A clay Buddha crossing the river. At this moment, Ning Yao was filled with an inexplicable sense of accomplishment. Listen to how wise I sound. Unfortunately, Chen Pingyan had grown up next door to a well-read scholar who recited Confucian texts every morning and evening, proclaiming, "I cultivate the vast and righteous spirit." So while he wasn't a scholar himself, he was familiar with their way of speaking. Even if some words were a little obscure, he could still guess their meaning. Ning Yao stared at him intently, searching for a reaction, shock, admiration, or at least curiosity. But Chen Pingyan only had an expression that said, "I understand. Please, continue." She was utterly disappointed. Her once confident, heroic demeanor instantly deflated. Annoyed, she snapped, "For example, since you saved my life, I'd naturally repay you by killing Fu Nanhua of Old Dragon City or Lu Jimo of Book Slip Lake for you. But if you want both of them dead to eliminate future threats, you'll have to pay me. After all, we only just met, we're not close enough for free favors. You'd need to give me 1 pouch of golden coins as a fee." She pointed to one of the money pouches. "I like this one. The other 2, meant for fostering disciples and honoring ancestors, have ugly designs and uninspiring inscriptions." Then, lifting her chin slightly, she said, "If we were outside this town, and you wanted to hire me for this job, you'd have to pay me 2 pouches of coins. In exchange, I'd take care of Old Dragon City and Cloud River Mountain for you. Of course, if I die at Lu Jimo's hands first, then the deal is void. After all, my cultivation level isn't that high yet. In martial arts, I'm only at the 9th level, having just stepped into the 6th realm. As for my cultivation on the 15-tiered tower of the path to immortality, I've only reached the middle 5th level, the Dragon Gate stage. Inside my elixir field, I have 6 meridian phantoms, but I haven't yet achieved the dotting the dragon's eye transformation or the celestial ascent technique." At this point, Chen Pingyan was completely lost. Seeing his utterly confused face, Ning Yao felt a mix of frustration and embarrassment. Being low in cultivation had always been a sore spot for her, and his clueless look only made it worse. Sensing the shift in mood, Chen Pingyan quickly changed the subject. "By the way, your injuries were really severe before. How are you already so much better?" Her expression darkened slightly. Folding her arms, she said hoarsely, "I was really close to dying. If Taoist Master Lu hadn't saved me, I'd already be gone. Either way, I owe you a huge favor. That's why I shouldn't be asking you for 3 pouches of golden coins. My life is worth far more than those coins Lu Jimo carries. I was wrong to even mention it. So just pretend I never said anything. When I leave this town, I'll do my best to eliminate your future threats. But let me make one thing clear, I'll only do what's within my ability. I won't throw my life away recklessly." She was clearly feeling down about having admitted fault. Chen Pingyan asked, "Which pouch is the one meant for fostering disciples?" She pointed at a golden yellow embroidered pouch. He took out 3 coins, held them in his palm, and then pushed all 3 pouches toward her. Smiling, he said, "Take them." She was utterly stunned. After a long silence, she finally asked, "Chen Pingyan, did you get your head slammed in a door when you were little?" He sighed. "No, but I did get hit in the face a lot by cow tails when I was herding." Her face immediately darkened. She slammed her hand on the table and demanded, "Do you like me?" Chen Pingyan was dumbfounded. She smirked, gave him a thumbs up, and said, "Good taste." Then, she curled her thumb and pointed it at herself, grinning brightly. "But I won't accept. I, Ning Yao, will only marry the greatest sword immortal in the world, no, in all of history. Someone who, with a single strike, would make even Taoist patriarchs, Buddhist saints, and Confucian sages step aside. Chen Pingyin's face turned red. Scratching his head, he hurriedly clarified, "You misunderstood. I don't like you like that." Ning Yao narrowed her eyes. Leaning forward, she held up her fingers, leaving a tiny gap between her thumb and index finger. "Not even a little bit?" He shook his head firmly. "No. Not at all. Rest assured." She let out a long sigh and looked at him with pity. "Chen Pingyan, if you ever do get married, your wife will probably be really simple-minded." Chen Pingyan just laughed. "As long as she's a good person, that's all that matters." Ning Yao had no response to that. As Lu Tianjung entered Naben Alley not long ago, another rare visitor arrived, a scholarly young man in a green robe, Tru Jiu, exuding an air of elegance much like the learned teacher, Te Tin Xuan. Tru Jiu was the eldest grandson of one of the 4 great families in the town. Unlike the indulgent and dissipated Lu Qin Thuan, who was also born into wealth, Tru Jiu had a sterling reputation. Many widowed elders in town had benefited from his kindness. If one were to say that this was a strategic move to cultivate a good reputation, it would be underestimating his character. Since the age of 10, he had been naturally inclined to help others, year after year, never wavering. Even the elderly of Fuck Lock Street, who had watched him grow up, always praised him, using him as a benchmark to lecture their own descendants. This, however, made it difficult for Tru Jiu to form deep friendships with his peers. Lu Qin Thuan and his unruly group had no interest in associating with a bookworm who spent his days discussing propriety and virtue. Imagine a lively group sneaking off to peek at a young widow, only to have someone next to them constantly preaching about moral decency. It would be a mood killer. Thus, in recent years, Tru Jiu preferred to interact with those outside Fuck Lock Street, exploring almost every alley in town except for Naben Alley. The reason was simple: Tong Tap Tan lived there, a peer who often left Tru Jiu feeling ashamed of himself. If there was anyone Tru Jiu considered a friend, it was probably Tong Tap Tan. Though he had always lost to him in their games of chess, and despite his strong competitive nature, he deeply admired Tong Tap Tan's extraordinary intelligence. However, there was a lingering sense of disappointment. His instincts told him that despite their camaraderie, Tong Tap Tan never truly regarded him as a genuine confidant. Though he had never visited Tong Tap Tan's house before, the moment he saw a particular cluster of buildings, he instinctively knew it belonged to him. The door was adorned with numerous couplets for the Spring Festival, each written in Tong Tap Tan's hand. The handwriting was highly eclectic, with each character exuding a distinct personality. Gufong was fluid and uninhibited, Yuyan carried profound depth, Kai was bold and thunderous, while Quoc was calm and composed, reminiscent of a sage's measured stance. Standing at the entrance, Tru Jiu was momentarily entranced, completely forgetting to knock. Leaning forward, he stared blankly at the calligraphy, feeling as if he lacked the courage to knock on the door. Having meticulously practiced writing for years, he understood better than anyone the immense strength and spirit imbued in each stroke of these characters. Feeling a deep sense of inadequacy, he reached into his sleeve, pulled out a small pouch of money, and bent down to place it by the door, intending to leave quietly. Just then, the door swung open. Tru Jiu looked up to see Tong Tap Tan stepping out with his maid, Tri Q. The two were laughing and chatting. Feigning surprise, Tong Tap Tan teased, "Tru Jiu, such a grand gesture, what do you wish for in return?" Feeling embarrassed, Tru Jiu picked up the pouch, about to explain, but before he could, Tong Tap Tan snatched it from him, grinning mischievously. "Oh my, so Tru Jiu has come bearing gifts. How generous! But let me be clear, I may be poor, but I have no gifts worthy of your esteemed status. If you refuse to take it back, it would be improper." Tru Jiu forced a smile. "This is merely a farewell gift. No need to return the gesture." Tong Tap Tan turned to his maid with a knowing smile and handed her the pouch. "See? I told you Tru Jiu is the most courteous scholar in town. What do you think?" Tri-Q accepted the pouch, cradling it against her chest. She smiled sweetly, bowing slightly. Thank you, young Master True. My master always says, a family that accumulates good deeds will have blessings to spare, a kind-hearted person will have a field of fortune. I wish you boundless success and prosperity. True Jiu quickly returned the courtesy. Thank you for your kind words, Tri-Q. Tong Tap Tan yawned and stretched. Aren't you all exhausted from this exchange? Tri-Q giggled. If every bow came with a pouch of money, I could do 1,000 more. True Jiu wiped the sweat from his forehead. I'm afraid you'll be disappointed. Tong Tap Tan clapped a hand on his shoulder. Come, let's drink. True Jiu hesitated, prompting Tong Tap Tan to taunt him. Coward. What's the point of reading books if you can't embrace the elegance of a scholar? True Jiu cautiously asked, just a little drink? Tong Tap Tan scoffed, no. We drink until we're dead drunk. Before True Jiu could protest, Tong Tap Tan had already hooked an arm around his neck and dragged him away. Elsewhere, a straw-shoe-wearing boy hurried to an overgrown, abandoned shrine. The area was littered with broken clay statues, some missing heads, others missing limbs, barely held together by crude repairs. The people of the town had long since stopped paying them any respect. Elders would occasionally warn children not to play there, yet the children still did, hiding, catching crickets, enjoying their time. Eventually, those same children would grow old and pass down the same warnings to the next generation. Life continued, unchanged, in an endless cycle. At the shrine, the boy carefully placed 3 ancient coins into the cracks of the statues. Moving from one broken idol to the next, he repeated the gesture with reverence. Before leaving, he stood among the tall grass, pressed his palms together, and quietly prayed. Blessings, blessings, may peace be upon me. I hope you will protect my parents in their next life, so they do not suffer. If possible, please tell them that I am doing well and they need not worry. Sunset at the East Gate. At sunset, as Chen Pingyan returned to town, he passed through the eastern city gate. The scruffy gatekeeper was still sitting there, humming a tune, currently at the verse. Time should never be taken lightly, riches and glory can all be cast aside. Perhaps disturbed by the hurried footsteps of the straw-sandal-wearing boy, the man opened his eyes, just in time to see this debt-collecting little devil rushing inside. His mood instantly soured, and he waved his hand impatiently. Go, go. You brat, your time isn't worth a damn coin. If you ever get even a sliver of wealth and glory, you better burn incense in gratitude. As Chen Pingyan ran past, he raised a hand high and waved all 5 fingers vigorously. Clearly, he was reminding the gatekeeper of the 5 copper coins worth of kinship between them. The man spat on the ground and cursed, "You're nothing special either." The boy's figure quickly disappeared, leaving the man gazing up at the clear blue sky, which resembled a layer of beautifully glazed ceramic. Scratching his stubbly chin, he muttered to himself, that sage once recited a poem, something about fine things, colored glaze. At that moment, an ox cart slowly rolled out of town. Sitting atop it was a young scholar in blue robes, his reputation well known. The cart driver, a middle-aged man with a simple expression, kept his eyes on the road. The gatekeeper immediately waved and called out loudly with a grin, "Jiao, no rush just yet. Your big brother here has a phrase stuck in his head, something about fine things, colored glaze, but I can't remember the rest. You're the scholar here, help me out." With a bright, proud expression, Zhao Jiao clutched a small bundle in his arms and raised his voice. Fine things in this world never last, purple clouds disperse, and colored glaze shatters. The gatekeeper gave him a thumbs up. No doubt about it, Jiao, you're one hell of a scholar. Don't forget your old hometown when you make it big. Who knows, maybe one day you'll come back and replace your teacher, teaching the kids here. That would be a fine thing, wouldn't it? Zhao Jiao froze for a moment, then clasped his hands in a respectful bow and said with a smile, thank you for the kind words, brother." Feeling pleased, the gatekeeper reached into his sleeve, pulled out a small embroidered pouch, and tossed it high toward the scholar. With a wide grin, he said, "For all the spring festival couplets you've written for me over the years. You never once complained, and I can tell you've got a good heart. I never misjudge people. Here, take this little token, may your journey be smooth." Zhao Jiao hurriedly caught the pouch. "Until we meet again." The gatekeeper chuckled and nodded, waving at the departing scholar. Then, with a sigh, he murmured, "It's hard to say how long we'll last in this world." The straw-sandal boy Chen Pingyan headed deeper into town, while Zhao Jiao's ox cart rolled toward the vast world beyond. They passed each other, heading in opposite directions. Leaning against the old locust tree, the gatekeeper counted on his fingers, mumbling. "So far, we've had the kid with the bamboo basket full of golden carp, the widow's son from Muddy Alley, and now this scholar from Blessing Fortune Street. That makes 3. But there are still so many more who've come. Once they all charge in, won't all that's left for me be scavenging scraps? Maybe I should take this chance to find a disciple, one who knows how to give a good shoulder rub." He rubbed his wrinkled, sunburned face and grinned to himself. "If she's a pretty young girl, even better. Even if her face isn't great, her legs have to be long." The town's most infamous bachelor rogue leaned back with his hands behind his head, looking up at the sky. He was thoroughly entertained by his own thoughts. Life was simple. Life was good. At Lu Xianyang's house. Before Chen Pingyan left Muddy Alley, he made plans with Lu Xianyang and the black-clad girl to meet at Lu's home later. When Chen Pingyan arrived, the door was unlocked. He pushed it open and stepped inside. In the main hall, Lu Xianyang was carefully wiping and polishing an ancient ancestral treasure armor with a clean cloth. Meanwhile, Ning Yao, now wearing her veiled hat again, stood nearby. Her saber was strapped to her waist, and she carried a long sword with a white scabbard carelessly in her hand. For some reason, Chen Pingyan couldn't shake the feeling that Ning Yao disliked this sword. On the table lay Lu Xianyang's treasured heirloom armor. Calling it treasure felt odd, given how ugly it looked, like a mass of charred iron. The enormous armor was covered in gnarled, bark-like veins of metal, with 5 deep claw marks running diagonally from the left shoulder down to the right waist. Neither boy could imagine what kind of massive beast could have left such terrifying scars. Later, when the imperial court forbade logging and mining in the nearby mountains, neither of them ever dared to break the law, largely because of such fears. But what puzzled Chen Pingyan was that despite how hideous the armor was, Lu Xianyang treated it as an absolute treasure. Even Chen Pingyan, his closest friend, had only been allowed to look at it for a brief moment before it was carefully stored away again. Still, seeing how Lu Xianyang kept sneaking glances at Ning Yao, Chen Pingyan felt amused. Lu Xianyang had always been like this, his eyes couldn't resist pretty girls. But he wasn't truly infatuated, he just liked to show off. For example, back when they used to swim near Wolf Bridge, if a group of girls happened to pass by leading cows or carrying bundles of rice, Lu Xianyang would immediately scramble up onto a large rock, flex his muscles, and clear his throat loudly, as if declaring to the world his heroic presence. Then, with a final dramatic cough, he'd dive back into the water. Chen Pingyan had always wanted to tell him the truth, that most of the girls rolled their eyes, grumbled under their breath, or ignored him entirely. Not once had he ever impressed anyone. But ever since Lu Xianyang fell for Tikue, Song Jutan's maidservant, he had stopped paying attention to any other girl. Even now, though he was showing off in front of Ning Yao, it was more about proving himself rather than flirting. He wanted to show her that his family heirloom armor was just as unique and valuable as her swords. Ning Yao, without a word, placed her long sword on an old lacquered cabinet with peeling paint. As she cleared space for it, she noticed a carved design on the back panel, a golden cassia tree under a full moon. She turned to Lu Xianyang and said, "This cabinet is worthless, but that carving, don't sell it off carelessly." Lu Xianyang, still polishing the armor, didn't even look up. I never liked that carving anyway. If you want it, just pry it off. She wasn't interested in dismantling it but curiously asked, what's it made of? Lu Xianyang glanced at it briefly. Some kind of old rock. My grandpa didn't even know where it came from. Chen Pingyan murmured, it's probably serpent gall stone, we find them in the stream near town. They come in many colors, but your ancestors must have only picked the golden ones, crushed them, and pressed them together. Ning Yao sighed, giving Chen Pingyan a deep look. You're a poor kid standing on a mountain of gold and silver. Chen Pingyan blinked. Wait, is this stuff valuable outside town? She adjusted her hat and replied, very. As Ning Yao left the house, she heard a voice behind her. See you tomorrow, Ning Yao. The straw sandal boy had already disappeared down the alley, his basket strapped to his back, walking briskly. She stood there, dumbfounded. Muttering to herself, she said, is he really this obsessed with money? As Lu Tianjung entered Naben Alley not long ago, another rare visitor arrived, a scholarly young man in a green robe, Truju, exuding an air of elegance much like the learned teacher, Tai Tin Xuan. Truju was the eldest grandson of one of the four great families in the town. Unlike the indulgent and dissipated Lu Qin Thuan, who was also born into wealth, Truju had a sterling reputation. Many widowed elders in town had benefited from his kindness. If one were to say that this was a strategic move to cultivate a good reputation, it would be underestimating his character. Since the age of 10, he had been naturally inclined to help others, year after year, never wavering. Even the elderly of Fuck Lock Street, who had watched him grow up, always praised him, using him as a benchmark to lecture their own descendants. This, however, made it difficult for Truju to form deep friendships with his peers. Lu Qin Thuan and his unruly group had no interest in associating with a bookworm who spent his days discussing propriety and virtue. Imagine a lively group sneaking off to peek at a young widow, only to have someone next to them constantly preaching about moral decency. It would be a mood killer. Thus, in recent years, Truju preferred to interact with those outside Fuck Lock Street, exploring almost every alley in town except for Naben Alley. The reason was simple. Tong Tap Tan lived there, a peer who often left Truju feeling ashamed of himself. If there was anyone Truju considered a friend, it was probably Tong Tap Tan. Though he had always lost to him in their games of chess, and despite his strong competitive nature, he deeply admired Tong Tap Tan's extraordinary intelligence. However, there was a lingering sense of disappointment. His instincts told him that despite their camaraderie, Tong Tap Tan never truly regarded him as a genuine confidant. Though he had never visited Tong Tap Tan's house before, the moment he saw a particular cluster of buildings, he instinctively knew it belonged to him. The door was adorned with numerous couplets for the Spring Festival, each written in Tong Tap Tan's hand. The handwriting was highly eclectic, with each character exuding a distinct personality. Gufong was fluid and uninhibited, Yuyan carried profound depth, Kai was bold and thunderous, while Kwok was calm and composed, reminiscent of a sage's measured stance. Standing at the entrance, Truju was momentarily entranced, completely forgetting to knock. Leaning forward, he stared blankly at the calligraphy, feeling as if he lacked the courage to knock on the door. Having meticulously practiced writing for years, he understood better than anyone the immense strength and spirit imbued in each stroke of these characters. Feeling a deep sense of inadequacy, he reached into his sleeve, pulled out a small pouch of money, and bent down to place it by the door, intending to leave quietly. Just then, the door swung open. Truju looked up to see Tong Tap Tan stepping out with his maid, Tri Q. The two were laughing and chatting. Feigning surprise, Tong Tap Tan teased, Truju, such a grand gesture, what do you wish for in return? Feeling embarrassed, Truju picked up the pouch, about to explain, but before he could, Tong Tap Tan snatched it from him, grinning mischievously. Oh my, so Truju has come bearing gifts. How generous. But let me be clear, I may be poor, but I have no gifts worthy of your esteemed status. If you refuse to take it back, it would be improper. Tru Ju forced a smile. This is merely a farewell gift. No need to return the gesture. Tong Tap Tan turned to his maid with a knowing smile and handed her the pouch. See? I told you Tru Ju is the most courteous scholar in town. What do you think? Tri Q accepted the pouch, cradling it against her chest. She smiled sweetly, bowing slightly. Thank you, young Master Tru. My master always says, a family that accumulates good deeds will have blessings to spare, a kind-hearted person will have a field of fortune. I wish you boundless success and prosperity. Tru Ju quickly returned the courtesy. Thank you for your kind words, Tri Q. Tong Tap Tan yawned and stretched. Aren't you all exhausted from this exchange? Tri Q giggled. If every bow came with a pouch of money, I could do 1,000 more. Tru Ju wiped the sweat from his forehead. I'm afraid you'll be disappointed. Tong Tap Tan clapped a hand on his shoulder. Come, let's drink. Tru Ju hesitated, prompting Tong Tap Tan to taunt him. Coward. What's the point of reading books if you can't embrace the elegance of a scholar? Tru Ju cautiously asked, just a little drink? Tong Tap Tan scoffed, no. We drink until we're dead drunk. Before Tru Ju could protest, Tong Tap Tan had already hooked an arm around his neck and dragged him away. Elsewhere, a straw-shoe-wearing boy hurried to an overgrown, abandoned shrine. The area was littered with broken clay statues, some missing heads, others missing limbs, barely held together by crude repairs. The people of the town had long since stopped paying them any respect. Elders would occasionally warn children not to play there, yet the children still did, hiding, catching crickets, enjoying their time. Eventually, those same children would grow old and pass down the same warnings to the next generation. Life continued, unchanged, in an endless cycle. At the shrine, the boy carefully placed 3 ancient coins into the cracks of the statues. Moving from one broken idol to the next, he repeated the gesture with reverence. Before leaving, he stood among the tall grass, pressed his palms together, and quietly prayed. Blessings, blessings, may peace be upon me. I hope you will protect my parents in their next life, so they do not suffer. If possible, please tell them that I am doing well and they need not worry. Meanwhile, as the young boy traversed the town, Tran Ben and ventured beyond its borders, heading toward the small stream under the starry night sky. Despite the darkness, he moved quickly, carefully selecting shallow areas to cross, avoiding the deeper parts beneath Lang Bridge. Carrying a large bamboo basket on his back, he waded through the water, collecting stones from the riverbed with one hand while keeping his wounded left hand dry. Each stone he retrieved felt like a fragment of hope. After filling half his basket with variously colored stones, he glanced at the sky, hoping to see a shooting star, but luck was not on his side. Undeterred, he pressed on, making his way to a deep pool where he had once swum with Lu Tianjun. This spot held a special memory. A massive, translucent stone resembling frozen cherry blossoms had once been found there. As he prepared to dive, he noticed a young girl in a blue robe sitting atop a rock, chewing on food with her cheeks puffed. She looked like a starving ghost reincarnated, making Tran Ben hesitate. Not wanting to disturb her, he quietly set down his basket and entered the water. Diving repeatedly, he retrieved colorful stones and even caught a fish. When he tossed it into a basket, the girl's eyes gleamed with excitement. Seeing her fascination, Tran Ben chuckled and offered her the fish. She eagerly accepted, smiling like a mischievous fox. Familiar eyes. Chen Ping'an was all too familiar with that look, the same way he once looked at Lu Xianyang when they were kids. Back then, Lu Xianyang was the king of the children in Apricot Blossom Alley and Muddy Alley, catching snakes, birds, and fish as if there were nothing in the world he couldn't do. As they grew up, the boys who once followed Lu Xianyang like a gang of loyal sidekicks went their separate ways. Some became apprentices at Longjiao, while most took up work as shop assistants or helped relatives manage accounts. As Song Juten once said, only those with no future end up toiling in the fields. In the end, the only one who still stuck with Lu Xianyang was Chen Pingyan. He strung the 3 slate fish together with a few blades of dogtail grass, then handed them to the girl. She took the fish and weighed them in her hand. They felt light, probably not enough for a proper plate of stir-fried fish with green peppers. She glanced expectantly at the pond and the stream, clearly hoping for more. Chen Pingyan understood and apologized, "The next ones I catch, I need for soup. A friend of mine needs to replenish their strength, so I can't give them away." The girl pointed at the bundle of food she had beside her, suggesting a trade. Chen Pingyan shook his head with a smile, "No need. Pastries taste good and can fill the stomach, but fish soup nourishes the body better." The girl nodded and didn't press the matter. She quietly returned to her seat, carefully setting the fish down by her feet before continuing her great mission of devouring food. Though Chen Pingyan was curious about her identity, he didn't pry. Based on her attire, she didn't seem like one of the pampered daughters from Blessing Fortune Street or Peach Leaf Alley, but she reminded him somewhat of his neighbor Tikue, elegant and quiet. Then a thought struck him: could she be a runaway maid, sneaking food from her household? He had heard that the rules in big mansions were terrifyingly strict. Lu Xianyang and Song Juten often exaggerated things when they talked, but this was the one topic they seemed to agree on. Lu Xianyang's version was particularly scary: a single misstep while walking, and the steward's men will break your legs and toss you onto the street to die. Song Juten, more skeptical, argued that Lu Xianyang had heard nonsense. It's not that extreme, but yes, the maids and older servants in grand households are trained to walk as silently as cats. At the time, Lu Xianyang had turned to Tikue, who was quietly snickering at the side, and immediately turned red with embarrassment, yelling, "Geese! What do you know about geese? Can your geese even talk? Catching fish and herbal remedies." Chen Pingyan eventually caught 7 or 8 slate fish. The bamboo basket wobbled under their weight, and his pale face showed that he was nearing his limit. Spring water was bone-chilling cold, seeping into his very bones. Worse still, his left hand, already injured, was growing numb. After his final catch, he quickly jumped onto the green stone slope and disappeared into the bushes by the stream, rustling through the grass. Before long, he emerged with 3 or 4 types of herbs, some with mud-covered roots still attached. He gathered them into his palm, picked up a smooth stone, and returned to the rocky slope. Finding a small natural indentation the size of his palm, he cleaned it thoroughly before carefully crushing the herbs into a pulp of vibrant green paste. The aroma of wild grass and damp earth filled the air. With his back turned to the girl, Chen Pingyan took a deep breath, clenched his teeth, and began unwrapping the bandages on his left hand. Cold sweat quickly formed on his forehead, mixing with the freezing water dripping from his hair. The wound was ghastly, flesh torn and raw, but at least the bone was no longer visible. Still, it looked gruesome. He had been so focused on money-making plans and catching fish that he had forgotten that his left hand would inevitably touch the water. Now, he realized he had made a terrible mistake. Just as he stood there, momentarily dumbfounded, a hand suddenly appeared in front of him. A few clean, dry fabric strips were placed in his palm. It was the girl. At some point, she had torn off a part of her sleeve and offered it to him without a word. Chen Pingyan let out a bitter chuckle but didn't hesitate. He applied the herbal paste, bit one end of the cloth, and used his right hand to securely wrap the wound with a series of swift, precise movements, like a butterfly weaving silk, fluid and practiced. Watching this, the girl squatted nearby and gave him a thumbs up, her face expressing pure admiration. Chen Pingyan pointed at his own teary eyes and laughed weakly. "It actually hurts so bad I'm crying." The girl glanced at the basket full of fish and the sack full of stones on the side. Her brows furrowed slightly in confusion. Chen Pingyan, a little embarrassed, admitted, those stones can be sold for money. And I still need fish for the soup. The girl, still looking somewhat lost, remained silent. Her gaze drifted over the water, distant and unfocused. The stream babbled, the rocks glistened under the rippling surface, and the air was filled with the scent of damp earth. At that moment, under the starlit sky, in the vast and silent world, there seemed to be only two people, one boy and one girl. Gradually, Chen Pingyan calmed down. His heavy breathing slowed, becoming deep and even. Like a stormy stream that had burst its banks, he was now returning to a steady trickle, a quiet, enduring spring that would flow for years to come. This subtle transformation went unnoticed even by Chen Pingyan himself, natural and unforced, like water flowing down its destined path. A heavy basket, a light heart. He knew he couldn't stay out for too long with wet clothes in the early spring chill. He needed to return to town and change into something dry. Though Chen Pingyan had never read medical books, he had learned from experience that getting sick was the worst thing in the world. He had long developed a sharp instinct for changes in weather and how his body reacted to them. So he put on his straw sandals, fastened his fish basket to his waist, and hoisted the heavier basket onto his back. He waved at the girl and smiled. "I'm heading back. You should go home soon too." As he made his way down the rocky slope, he couldn't help but turn back to warn her, "The water near Wolf Bridge is really deep. Be careful not to slip. If you're heading home, it's better to take the rice field side. Even if you fall, at least it'll just be mud and not the river." He stopped mid-sentence. Suddenly, his words sounded too ominous, like the kind of curse old Mrs. Gu from Muddy Alley would mutter under her breath. Feeling awkward, he shut his mouth and quickened his pace, running north toward town. The basket was heavy. But for once, the straw sandal boy felt light. For the first time in his life, after letting go of the past, Chen Pingyan truly wanted to live well. To survive. To thrive. For starters, he needed to make money. Enough to afford spring festival banners with fragrant ink, doors adorned with colorful god charms, and meat buns from Madame Mao's shop. Maybe even enough to buy a cow someday, and perhaps a little chicken to raise, just like Song Juten. And so, with a heart full of small dreams, Chen Pingyan ran off into the night.